feeding frenzy. But what about that rig? Because I know those of you who watch Total Fishing regularly always want us to show you the method, so here you go. Very, very simple float setup for you. I've got a braided hook length. Now this is about 18 inches long, it's 15-pound braid. I've got a size 8 hook, you can use a size 6 if you want. And I've got a swivel underneath this piece of rig putty. Now that piece of rig putty sits on the bottom of the lake, so it doesn't affect the balance of the float, and it holds the hook bait in position. Let's have a look at the float itself, because that's quite important. Now when you're float fishing for carp, especially in shallowish clear water, you want a float that's not going to spook them, and these crystal wagglers are absolutely ideal. It's a short float, it's clear so it won't spook the fish, they can't see its reflection, takes plenty of shot for its size. This is important as well, this long sight tip. Now you can buy interchangeable sight tips for these floats. I like a long sight tip when I'm fishing for big carp, because when they come in the swim they create a lot of disturbance. Now when you get that disturbance, the effect is it can quite often pull the float under for a second or two, but with plenty of tips showing, it gives you a chance to differentiate those line bites caused by the fish bubbling around in the swim and swimming into the line. Now they're what we call line bites, but a proper bite will take this tip down and it'll hold it under the water for a second or two. So that's how you tell a line bite from a proper bite. Well, so much for the theory. What about the practice? Now I've found a nice little swim in the corner of this gravel pit. There's a few reeds. It's reasonably deep, about 4 to 6 feet, and I've seen a few carp drifting around there. So the first stage is to go in and introduce some of this ground bait. It'll probably take an hour or so to settle down, but once it does, we're going to creep into the swim, drop the floatfish worm out there and see what happens. But first, let's go and bait up. Well, if ever there was a carpy looking swim on a gravel pit, it's got to be this one, hasn't it? Look at this. We've got some rushes over to our left. There's a tree over on the far side. I've seen carp drifting in and out the bay. I can't wait to get started, but I've got to wait for a while because I need to bait up first. And I'm going to put in some of this carpet feed. Very, very close in. Now the thing with carp is, provided that you don't disturb them, you can fish really close and expect good results. All these people who cast out 100, 150 yards into the lake, you've got to have a pretty good reason for doing that, because believe me, if you fish for carp the way I do, quite often I catch them right underneath the rod tip. And if more people did that, it would probably make my fishing more difficult. The great thing about this carpet feed is it does exactly what its name suggests. It creates a carpet on the bottom for the fish to pick over, and of course it's packed with all of those goodies. But in about an hour's time there'll be one extra goodie on that carpet: my worm hook bait. Well, I've got to approach this swim very quietly because it's literally fizzing now. There's clouds of stuff coming up off the bottom. I can see the dark shapes of fish moving over the bait patch. We've got them at really close range here, but if I bang about and stand over the top of them, I'm going to frighten them off. And that's one of the reasons why a float is such a good way of tackling these margin carp. The reason being that when you introduce the float, it makes a lot less disturbance than a 2 or a 3 ounce lead going in. You can get it in there quietly and literally not allow them to even suspect that anything's going on. So I'm going to put on a bunch of worms, 2 or 3 on this size 8 hook. Lovely worms these. Now I'm going to send the bait out there with a little underarm cast just beyond where the fish are feeding. Draw it back while the worm's up in the water and allow it to sink slowly. Now there's very little disturbance there, so hopefully the fish will stay in the swim and carry on feeding. Well, this was one of those classic carp sessions when everything went right. I'd approached the swim quietly, baited it up, and it wasn't long before there were little telltale dips on the float which signalled that the carp were feeding immediately around my hook bait. Probably about 10 minutes later it slid away, I counted to 2, struck, and then all hell let loose. Oh, here we go. Oh, yes. Cracking take. The float just bobbed a couple of times and slid down. I've got to try and keep this fish right out of the rushes. Oh, come here, baby. Oh my God, look at the bend in that rod. This fish had definitely had 3 shredded wheat. It pulled like hell. In fact, when I was playing it, it was more like playing a blue marlin than it was playing a carp. But a carp it was, and within a few seconds, it was safely in the net. And you know, when you're playing these fish, you've got to play them hard. Get them in the net, get them on the bank. It's the only way to do it. It's like landing a marlin. Well, how about that then? Whew. Unbelievable fight. And that's what close quarters float fishing is all about. There's the hook in the corner of the mouth. Real hit and hold stuff. Fabulous reward. Beautiful carp. Nice common. May not even have been hooked before this one. It's a fairly virgin gravel pit. And I could have spent the morning sitting behind buzzers, but I didn't. I got off my jacksie, had a look round the lake, found a quiet little corner, found some fish, baited up, 10 minutes on the float, bingo. And the motto to this tale is, if you sit there waiting for something to happen, it probably never will. But if you go out and make it happen, that's what you get. Brilliant. Okay, my beauty.